Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar. My name is Snell.
And I'm Rebecca Mitchell.
Now, we've got a number of things to cover off with you today, but I'd like to kick off, Rebecca, by doing a quick weather report. Is that okay? Because I know we've got a number of people joining us. In fact, we've got over 800 people joining us from literally all over the world.
Yeah.
So let's see, we've got a lot of people from India. Hello. A lot of people from the US.
The UK, we've got people from the UK. That's amazing. You're welcome.
Lots of people from New Zealand and a lot of people from Australia, so g'day. So literally all over the world. So you're very welcome. We're broadcasting live from Sydney, Australia. The time is 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Seaboard time. The weather is brilliant.
It's actually lovely, my favourite kind of weather. Sunny, beautiful.
Sunny, blue skies, and literally you wouldn't want to be dead on a day like today. It is an absolute cracker out there.
Yes.
So, look, we're not going to talk about the weather too much, but what we'd rather focus on is the Global MBA.
Yes, that's why we're here.
That's why we're here. And but just by way of a quick introduction, I guess. So I'm the Academic Program Director for the Global MBA. My name is Lan, as I mentioned earlier. I have come from industry, so I spent my first bit in professional services in management consulting, and then I switched, and then I was a gig worker, as what you'd call now, doing my own gigs, and then reinvented myself in the space of academia. So this is my third career transition. Now, literature tells us, Rebecca, that there are indeed 7 career switches that one can expect in this lifetime. So that's
a lot. It's a lot, isn't it? So I did the same, or quite similar. So I trained as a psychologist and worked as a psychologist, and then went into politics for my sins, and now I'm an academic and loving it.
So Rebecca is a professor of management, and I'm from the marketing discipline here at the business school at the Macquarie University, Macquarie Graduate School of Management. Rebecca also leads our leading specialisation.
Yes.
And in fact, that is why we're here talking this afternoon. We're going to do a fairly deep dive on concentrating on the leading specialisation. But before we go further, we've got one question to ask people, Rebecca.
I think it's interesting.
The question that we'd like to know is where you're from. Now, hopefully your view, you'll be seeing a question come up on your dial or your screen very soon.
Why do you want to do an MBA? That's what we're asking. So answer honestly, and it can be one or more than one. Your main reason for doing an MBA.
Yes, the most important reason that you're seeking to do your MBA.
Because we all come from different backgrounds and we all have different reasons for doing an MBA. And I think it's really good to kind of get a feel for the different reasons why you're thinking about joining us, and hopefully you will.
And and as Rebecca said, the motivations for considering an MBA, depending on where you are personally, where you are professionally, are quite varied. But I guess it comes down to some common areas from our experience. And here are some of the results coming in right now. So we can see from the results that a lot of you expressing a motivation to consider doing your MBA for career reasons.
And it's proven, isn't it? I mean, MBAs really are a terrific stepping stone. They do help with promotion. They're, probably one of the best ways, I think, to develop your career. And this is a internationally recognised program. So if you want to develop your career where you are now, it's useful. But if you want to develop your career beyond, your particular country, beyond your particular organisation, it's accepted everywhere. It's accepted and valued everywhere.
I think that's a really key important point, the transferability, the global transportability of the MBA credential is a much sought after credential. And that is why, and just to pick up on the points that Rebecca mentioned earlier, it is considered an enabler program. Indeed, we would reframe that with the Global MBA by being transformational in what we're trying to achieve. And that word I don't use lightly, and I'll explain what we mean by transformational as we talk through the program. So thank you very much for that input. I mean, we can see here the results coming in. That is promotion related, it is career progression, it has a lot to do with getting ahead. And, there are all the common reasons why.
There are some people here that just want to do better at their job, and I can relate to that. If you've moved into a management role and you want to understand how to really do well in that job. And then, which I really like, is there are some people who just like learning, like myself, a bit of a nerd, but it's important, and it's interesting. This is a great course, or this is a great program, so you're welcome.
Well, indeed. what's the expression that lifelong learning is part of the whole narrative of what we would associate when we talk about the discourse on the future of work. It is about lifelong learning. We see changes in the labour market, and we'll tap on in terms of those global market changes in a minute as well. So, Rebecca, I'd like to move on to talk more about, give everyone a bit of an overview of the course. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. Super.
Okay. So when we talk about the Global MBA, there are three essential points of positioning or differences that we'd like to really emphasise. The first one relates to the future-focused capabilities, and that really speaks to the curriculum that we've designed. So what we did was, the slide before you should be an overview of the actual 6 specialisations that you can see in the Global MBA. Now, how we came up with these 6 specialisations is we clearly consulted the literature. We looked at the number of reports coming in on what those future-focused attributes are that industry is seeking, because clearly we regard industry as the end buyer here. I mean, learners are obviously consuming and learning the experience, but in fact it is industry or the employers that are actually engaging and buying that product, if you like. And so when we look at what industry expectations are of the experienced hires market, because this is the market that we're in here, they're looking for a set of capabilities.
Of course, of course.
And so when we look at what those capabilities are, we identified 6 key future-focused capabilities. And before you'll see they include things such as strategizing, leading, analysing, influencing, adapting, and also problem-solving.
Yeah.
And so that, in a nutshell, is the curriculum for the Global MBA. Each of these 6 specialisations consist or comprise of 4 courses. And as again, we're going to do a deep dive on the leading specialisation, which is the specialisation that Rebecca is coincidentally leading as well. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, and this is just one snapshot of the program details. So some of the more frequently asked questions that we get is, how long does this course take, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the answer to that is quite complex, and you are the answer to that question, because it depends on how quickly or how slowly you want to take the journey. Our recommendation is that, we're making a few assumptions here, that you're probably working full-time, that you're probably juggling a family, and so we're all busy people. And so given those assumptions, a 2-year framework in terms of completion time is what we think is probably doable without, completely killing yourself in the process.
But you can extend it out, can't you? Completely. Like, if you wanted to do it over a longer period of time, that's definitely possible. And I know some people who've contacted me about it have said, look, I actually have X and Y and Z that I'm doing. Can I do the Global MBA over 48 months, for example? And I think, yes, you can. But you can do it over a shorter period too?
Yes, you can actually accelerate it and do it within 12 months.
Wow, that's fast.
That is fast. And, that it means that, you might not have a social life, for example, but it is indeed possible. But our recommendation would be, at a good pace, if you are holding a full-time job that is fairly senior or stressful or occupies a lot of your time, and you've got study load and you've got family commitments, 2 years is a manageable load.
Yeah. Okay, that's great.
The other thing is that the actual program, the whole degree, costs Australian dollars 33,000.
It's a great price. I shouldn't be talking about price, I know, but it is actually a really good price, because you have to remember that the MGSM has its own credible international brand, and it's AACSB accredited, which means that wherever you go in the world, this is going to be recognised. I think it's one of the least expensive MBAs that are internationally accredited, and it's also supremely flexible.
So the only thing I'd like to add to that point, Rebecca, is that when we consider what we're offering here, so this is a premium product. This is a quality branded. This is a business school that has got the international accreditation with AACSB, etc. So obviously we can't skimp on quality, and this is not what this is about. This is about making sure that we provide a quality MBA that is accessible to the mainstream of the market. And so this is not an MBA for the few. It is an MBA indeed for the many. And so this disruptive price point, we believe, is kind of innovative in itself, right? So let's recap. 2 years probably is the recommended course completion time. It comes in at 33,000 Australian or 20,000 US, or the slide breaks it down to per course, which is 1375. The other thing is that there are 6 actual teaching periods or sessions per calendar year. So that's why we're able, you can actually accelerate. When we talked about the front end of doing it within 12 months, it is possible because we have 6 study sessions, semesters, periods, whatever we want to call it. Let's call it sessions, okay? So six. In fact, the slide calls it terms. So let's call it terms. 6 terms per year. And then finally, there are 24 courses all up, which is what we talked about earlier. Each course consists of 2 credit points, so it's 48 credit points in total.
Okay.
So that's what we're looking at.
So a course is quite small, I think. A course isn't, the great thing about this, there are little building blocks that you can do. So you've got 24 seems like a lot, but each course is only 6 weeks long. So that means if you've got 6 weeks and you think, okay, there's a bit of a lull here at work, you can do a couple of courses because they're actually, quite small, self-contained 6-week blocks.
That's right.
I think that's useful.
And that is very useful. And that's what I like to term stackable because, so we talked about the future focus capabilities in terms of the curriculum. The second point is its stackable model to which Rebecca just alluded to. So this is where we genuinely mean that you can accelerate or pull back depending on where you are with work or your commitments. And so if you do have a bit of a sabbatical period in front of you, you can actually go ahead and accelerate and get quite a few done. But then you can also pull back if you've got someone sick in the family or whatever reason it is. So it is completely flexible to your needs. Okay, so let's move down to the next slide. And these capture a number of frequently asked questions, if you will. And so we've kind of collected a database of frequently asked questions over our experience as program directors. And, what is the MBA? How much is it? We've covered some of those things at a very high level. But as I said in my opening, today is all about a deep dive on the leading specialisation. And so if we go to the next slide, it is more about some of the anticipated questions that have been coming across in terms of our inquiries. And things such as, what is leading specialisation about? Why should I actually be interested in doing this specialisation? Can you take me through some of the subjects of the courses? What about some more information on the assessments? And, who's teaching them? Are they faculty members? Are they industry? Who's doing this?
Many questions.
Many questions, Rebecca, and hopefully you've got all the answers.
I've got some of the answers.
To all of them. So as a context, I suppose, Rebecca, when we talk about leading, we're talking about leadership, we're talking about talent management. But the burning platform or the context around this is the changes that we see in the labour market,
Oh, yes.
And the labour market is being, significantly disrupted by a number of tech disruptions. And in fact, disruption is the norm. It's a constant.
Look, I hear this and I agree. I really agree with this. But while there are so many changes that we have to deal with, and we have to deal with them all the time, one thing or many things don't change. And the things that don't change are people. So you as a leader or a potential leader are going to always be faced with the same things like, how am I going to motivate the people around me? What am I going to do to manage conflict? Is money important to get people to do a good job? How am I meant to choose what strategy? Those questions, no matter where we are and what we're doing and the fast pace of technological and environmental change, the people that you're dealing with, they're the same questions. And you have to be a really good leader to be able to deal with those questions. And you know what's interesting? Most of us learn how to be a leader by looking at maybe the people who led us, or by looking at a person who leads well in another organisation, or maybe their co-worker, their colleague. And because we do that, we often make the same mistakes as those people. Leading is actually difficult. It's very easy to create kind of meaningless work to demotivate people. Do you know what? I was reading the other day that 60% of people avoid conflict And yet there's a whole lot of research that says that properly managed conflict is the key to driving change and to innovating. So we're talking 60% of people, 60% of leaders are making the wrong choice, doing the wrong thing. So I think understanding leadership can make a huge difference, and that's what we try and do. We try and use evidence from psychology, sociology, strategy, literature to create a really good understanding and build really strong capabilities in leadership.
And we're taking a fairly different approach to that of a siloed approach that you might typically find in some other programs, in that we're presenting a more integrated, interdisciplinary approach. So all those bodies of literature that you mentioned a moment ago, we're sort of drawing upon very disparate fields and presenting and integrating. And I think that's quite important when we're thinking about the context of the future of work, because by and large, although, as you say, despite the many changes that we're seeing around us, some things don't change. And because we don't know what we don't know, it's a truth, and a universal truth. We don't know what the future brings, but what we do know is how to prepare ourselves for it. And so the spin into that, if you will, is how do we future-proof ourselves? And so leadership abilities, understanding how to motivate people, understanding how to harness that talent becomes critical. Yeah.
And one of the things that I think I'd like to pick up on here, which is really interesting, I've taught on MBAs around the world in many different countries, actually. And one of the things that's different about this MBA, and I think you'll really find it interesting, is this capability focus. So it's not just about what does the research tell us, what does industry want. We actually help you develop these capabilities. Now, you find that hard to believe probably because it is an online platform, but we do things like the Habit Corner, where we ask people to rehearse things, to think about different scenarios and to rehearse them and practice them every day, because we know that that's actually how you build skills and build capabilities. So it's a bit different, I think, in that way, in that it's not just about book smarts. It's about really learning how to lead. Not what is leadership, but how to lead. That makes us a little bit different.
I think so. So the applied nature to which, Rebecca, I mean, that is a distinct point of departure. And so we've got that throughout our whole curriculum. So it's not just about the theory, it's how it's applied and how we see that manifesting itself in terms of different applications. So be it startups, be it small business, mid-sized business, or even large corporates. So that diversified approach, and also from different sectors, I think is really key. How we bring that to life as well is that we've got a number of different industry expert interviews that we draw on to share their insights in terms of how they interpret, implement, or actually reframe what leadership looks like to them and to their organisation. The other thing I'd like just to touch on that Rebecca mentioned just a moment ago is the focus on capabilities, and why capabilities development is important is because we kind of reframe it. So it's not just about skills. The term skills almost represents a sort of transactional, whereas capabilities is about a bundle of skills.
Okay, yes.
So when we're talking about the leading specialisation, and remember each specialisation comprises of 4 courses, that is a bundle of skills within that. So we develop that capability. So what is really important as your value proposition coming out of this program when you're talking to your potential employer in an interview situation or for that next promotion is how do you actually demonstrate that capability? So one of the questions that they'll typically ask you is that, you know what, we're looking for someone that is a really effective communicator. It is not enough these days, Rebecca, to be really good, technically competent. That is assumed. It's actually how we interpret this, how we actually get some strategic insights, how we communicate that. So that reflects a certain set of bundles of capabilities. And so that's what we're getting at.
I like that. And you know what else? Which I just want to touch on? It's interesting. It's really interesting, some of this stuff.
I hope so.
It is. It is. And we've got some we've brought together some excellent professors. So yeah, we are really talking about some world-leading professors, but it is interesting stuff. It's great understanding, what makes people tick, why haven't I able to get these staff to do what I want them to do? What? And to really dig into the psychology behind that. That's interesting. You know, what is this strategy, this global strategy that I see my competitor pursuing? How is it working? It's really interesting to dig into that, understanding cross-cultural issues. We had a fantastic speaker on that, really good. So it's valuable, it's useful, it'll get you places, but it is really interesting. You will enjoy this. Like, I guarantee it, except
it's maybe Rebecca may be a little biased because, she kind of developed it and she's teaching it. But there are others. So let's go through one by one the subjects or courses that are part of this thing we call leading. So the first one is Know Your People. And this is one that Rebecca actually developed in terms of the curriculum and is teaching, yeah?
Yeah, it is. And there I am in front of you with much nicer hair.
Just in case. Yeah. She's real. She's sitting right next to me. Right? So, Rebecca, why don't you just take us through what Know Your People is? Because what is this subject?
Okay, so basically what we did here was engage with industry and look at actually some of our people who'd done MBAs and ask them what was really useful when it came to people and leading people. And we developed this course around that. So we look at some of the really critical functions of leadership when it comes to people. We look at, for example, how do you manage conflict? And I'll stop right there and just let's have a little bit of a look in that. When people talk about conflict, they often think about, name calling or big red faces and maybe even shouting. So we really break that down and say, look, is that really what conflict is? What's the difference between yelling at somebody and debating? What's the difference between having some emotion and a bit of friction and having a cool head and being task-focused? And then we look at how leaders can sort of pull that apart and make use of the really good aspects of conflict, which is the task-focused stuff where people have a level head and avoid some of that relationship-focused angry stuff. But we also say that actually to move people forward, so to drive change, you've got to have a bit of emotion, you've got to have a bit of engagement. And when people are challenged, they do feel a little bit threatened. And so what the leader has to do is a very fine balance. And it's not easy, but we go through that. So we look at conflict, we look at motivation, and that's key, isn't it?
Motivation theories, is it? In terms of what
that's right. And that's important, I think, because a lot of people do the wrong thing. And, I know I have, when I've been working with leading people, we focus on things like money, and it just doesn't work. If you have a look at really great leaders, they do things like develop meaning in people's jobs, develop intrinsic motivation so that people come to work and they want to work. And that's what you need. Money only goes so far, but if somebody comes to work and they see value in what they're doing and they want to work, you'll get endless effort, persistence.
Yeah, that sense of fulfillment and real meaning.
Yeah.
I mean, and that also taps into very nicely in terms of what people, some of the observations and changes as to what is motivating the millennials, for example.
Yes, we do cover that, don't we?
Yes,
we've got
in
great
the curriculum. Yeah. So it's actually intergenerational things in terms of touching on the different motivations when we look at the segments of the labour market. So what motivates one group may not necessarily motivate the other group. So if we have a look at the dichotomy of the ageing or the workforce, we've got the sort of early career, and what inspires them is very different, Rebecca, to what, someone is the mature, experienced.
People like me, we're interested in superannuation and pensions. It's hardly going to interest you if you're 20. Anyway.
So that's the content, some of the content for Know Your People.
Teamwork's another one.
Teamwork, collaboration.
That's really important. We look at actually a couple of trends, I think, which are really emerging as important. How to manage a diverse workforce.
Yes.
So we look at cross-cultural issues. How to manage in a global organisation.
Yes.
We look at that. So really quite a broad coverage, but very pertinent stuff. You'll get a lot out of that course.
Fabulous. Okay, so that's Know Your People. Now, the next one within Rebecca's specialisation is called Know Your Organisation. And this course is actually being developed by Professor Jaco Locke.
The wonderful Jaco Locke, yes.
We're very lucky to have Jaco.
Yeah.
So Jaco comes from a number of other very prestigious universities.
Fabulous teacher.
He did
really
his PhD at Cambridge, is that right?
Yeah.
Cambridge, and then did a big stint at University of New South Wales here, which is one of the G8 universities here. And then we're lucky to have him at MGSM.
Yeah.
So Jaco's course, can you give us a bit of an overview of Jaco's course?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting course, and it's sort of where Know Your People focuses on people, Jaco focuses more on the organisation. And look, he asks interesting questions about designing your organisation, structuring your organisation. He digs right into strategy and the choices that managers, leaders have to make, can make and have to make, and often move away from it, aren't strategic in their focus because they don't understand those choices. Well, he really clarifies that. It's a very good course. Looks at culture too and deals with that very, very well, I think. So it's a good foundation for some of the other courses, but it's also a great complement to them and a standalone. I mean, I think it's a really interesting course. I know a couple of people who've done the open content for Know Your People and Know Your Organisations, or Know Your Organisation, and they've really enjoyed it. A lot of those people have been supervisors, managers, but also people from like a few of my friends who are nurses, dentists, doctors, accountants, professions who wanted to look at the strategic aspect of an organisation or how a strong culture should be developed. So, yeah, really great content that's pertinent, I think, to a lot of different people.
Right. And I think he also does an exploration in terms of the alignment of the major bases that, so if we're thinking about an organisation, the organisation structure and culture as what Rebecca mentioned, but then also the systems and the processes behind that. So, because, often there's a whole set of decisions and, of course, an implementation that's attached to those, but has significant implications. And so we all operate on finite resources. And so that question that Rebecca mentioned up front is it strategic? Is it a priority? Because everything's important. We're all very busy people. So what's more important? What shall we pursue that is aligned? So I think these are some of the issues that Jaco explores as well. Okay. The next one in the leading one specialisation is called Adapt Your Leadership Style.
Now, this is an interesting one, I think, because a lot of people read about leadership, we're, I guess, bombarded a little bit, authentic leadership, shared leadership, transformational leadership, even self-leadership. And it's very easy to just read about those and maybe understand them, but it's another thing altogether to know, look, what's best for me now in this situation? How can I use all of this information and translate it into being an effective leader? And I think Richard, who's leading this course, fantastic Richard, I think he does a very good job at pulling apart what those different leadership styles really mean and how they're enacted, how you can use the best of those leadership styles to change the way that you lead and be really effective in a leadership role. So I think that's an interesting course because we hear so much about these different styles. But there's one thing, just knowing it, being able to describe it, and it's very different to actually think, what I need now? I need to do X and I need to do Y. I need to be seen to be authentic. I need to create some kind of compelling vision here. So that's a great course. A pure, really is a foundational course around leadership. You'll understand it very well at the end of that course, won't you?
That's right. And one of the things that I like to describe as a metaphor in terms of some of the learning outcomes would be things that it's a language.
Yes,
So you know, the terms that Rebecca mentioned earlier about leadership types, I mean, you know, try this at your next party, right? It's like we're having a social conversation outside work, you know, with a person at a party, and they're going, so what are you working on today or whatever? So look, you know, what kind of leader are you? Are you transformational? Are you a servant leader? Are you distributed? Or, you know, just try that and we'll go, what are you talking about? I guess the point that I'm making here is that you'll come across a number of terms, language, constructs that we would typically describe in the literature for leadership. That is important because it does talk about a certain set of behaviours of that type of leader. And when you come to consider the different types of leadership style, then you also have to question your own leadership style. And so it's actually a very sobering experience.
I think it is. And I also think one of the things we do is we fall into a pattern of leading, and in fact a pattern of behaviour everywhere, don't we?
Right.
So we might always be one particular type of leader, but work changes, priorities change. You've got different types of staff doing different types of things. Sometimes you just might want to get things done quickly. Other times you might want to drive something substantially different, and different types of leaders are effective in those different situations, or one person who knows how to change their leadership style. And I think Richard does that quite well. He's able to talk about how you adapt your leadership style to suit the situation. I think he's good at that.
That's right. And if there's any course title that reflects the fluid nature of the future of work, it is this one. The adaptability and understanding and knowing when to change your leadership style depending on the role, the context, the sector, the organisation. All these variables have to come into play.
Yeah, that's so true.
Okay, and then the final one in this specialisation is what we call become a meaning maker. So what is this about, Rebecca?
There I am again.
Here you are again.
It's a title that you won't be familiar with because you don't see it on many MBA programs. You don't, you know, but I think it's filling a gap. And let me talk about this gap. So a lot of us want to do things at work. We might want to drive change. We might want to build a reputation. We know what we want to say. So we know the message that we want to craft. We know the image perhaps that we want to create for our team or our organisation. So we know the what, and this is about the how. This is about how do you develop a message so that it is meaningful for people, so that it gets people on board, so that it can actually drive change. We have this fantastic market specialist, don't we? Abbas. He's absolutely wonderful. And he does, in this course, he does 2 units, I think 2 units.
2 modules,
2 modules on building an image, a reputation, taking all that fabulous marketing literature and really making it accessible. So even people like me who've got no marketing background at all can understand it. And I think it's something that's quite unusual because we then take somebody who is actually a professional actor, a professional opera singer, and Arabella.
Yes.
And she talks about communicating. She's fantastic, really brilliant. And then me again. And I talk about how you craft that. You know, I'll tell you. Yes, I'll talk about one thing, which just to give you a taster, because I think it's interesting. I talk about when we have a look at NASA.
Yes.
And landing on the moon a long, long time ago. But there is this story where JFK walked in to the building and he saw a janitor and he said, "What are you doing?" And the janitor said, "I'm putting a man on the moon." And so we take the learning from NASA. There's a paper that just came out in 2018, so very fresh, that looks at how do you get a janitor to feel like they are putting a man on the moon. How do you get a janitor to feel that sense of meaning? Because that's real leadership and that's really crafting a meaningful message. And so we look at that. And I think that's First time I've done that, but I really enjoyed it.
It's a really interesting subject,
Awesome.
particularly in the current geopolitical climate that we live in. So just to extend and build on some further examples in the Australian market, so what's dominating some of the headlines here has been some of the outcomes of the Royal Commission. And so when Rebecca talks about meaning, the other words that come in my mind when I consider the interest of becoming a meaning maker in that climate is authenticity, is integrity. And so, and ethics there's a strong underlying current of ethical behaviour that drives some of these decisions that actually makes up the cultures that we're talking about that can be quite toxic. Indeed, they have been quite toxic in the case of the findings of the Royal Commission. And so really in that context, there is a sense of meaningless from people as well, because that sense of being disillusioned, disengaged, and listening to this rhetoric that doesn't seem to change, and so that there's no sense of authenticity. So when we talk about what is meaning to an individual, how do I make meaning from that? How do I construct meaning from an individual perspective? What does that meaning look like in an organisational perspective to where I am, my role identity, and how does that manifest itself from a societal perspective? These are all the complexities that we need to consider when we think about becoming a meaning maker.
But, you know, you as leaders can do all this. I mean, it sounds challenging. It does sound challenging, I know, but we take you through these steps. This is what this program is about. It's not just about people using big words and creating complexity. We take you through this learning. It's a very accessible, you know, it's not easy, but it's easy to relate to.
It's approachable.
Yeah. I got my sister to do the course. She's a social worker. And I know.
No, it's very good. It's very good.
She loved it. A social worker. She absolutely loved it. And none of this was familiar to her. None of it. And yet she came to me and she said, is that really true? Is it? Tell me about that. I was telling the people at work about it. Is it really true? So I think don't worry at all if what we're saying sounds like that's a lot, that's complex. You will be able to do this and you will love it.
Yeah, and I guess the other assurance that we'd like to sort of impress upon you is that there's support networks all the way through. And so there's obviously the academics, us, who will be there to support you. There'll be a whole bunch of other staff on hand to support you. There's a library facility. So this is something that we put a lot of time and effort in terms of understanding how we can better support you such that your experience is a positive one, such that you'll complete this course. So look, Rebecca, we've just gone through the 4 courses within the leading specialisation. So hopefully that gives people a better sense of the type of content that they could likely experience when they do this. Rebecca also mentioned that, you know, a number of learners have gone through. Now, 3 of the courses are available right now in terms of the open space. So if you're wondering, if you're curious, which we encourage you to be curious, why don't you hop on to Coursera and have a look at the open courses, because they're there right now, right?
They are. I wanted to say one more thing about assessments, because in your other earlier slide, I think there was a question about assessments, and everybody's always worried about assessments. And just picking up on your point, one of the things that I think you've managed to do as the director is create assessments that help people learn and help them let us know what they know, rather than trying to catch you out and see what you don't know. The other thing I think is that you're well supported. So if you don't know how to do an assessment, there will be somebody that will help you. There are webinars on assessments. You know, you'll be part of obviously a cohort, a group of other students. We'll be working with you. So, you know, if this is your first time studying, or if you feel like this is a big jump for you, there is a lot of support around assessments, isn't there? And rest assured, we are interested in what you know, not what you don't know.
That's right. That reflective learning is probably the most powerful form of learning that there is. So that's what we build into our assessments. And the learning science behind all this, there's a sequence here. There's a method to our madness. It's not just random things thrown together. And so what we're trying to do is really scaffold that learning experience so that you can build the mastery and the confidence as you go through. And that's largely probably that whole 80-20 rule. 80% of it will will be associated with your confidence building. So hopefully that's what you'll get from the journey from this program. Now, I'm conscious of the time too, Rebecca, and look, there are a few other slides that we had on our deck there, and I guess the only two other things that I really want to talk about are the admission criteria, because we do get a lot of we do get a lot of questions on, what is the admission criteria, and the slide that you should probably be seeing in front of you is titled Admissions and Pathways. And so really there is a direct admission pathway, and that criteria is exactly the same as the on-ground face-to-face MBA that we are offering at the moment. And that is an undergraduate degree that is equivalent to an Australian undergraduate degree, level 7. We have 3 years work experience at management or supervisory level, IELTS of 7.6. So that's a criteria for direct
entry. What
happens
if you don't have that? And
so that is a key question. And when we look at our current experience, we know that there are a number of people who don't, for whatever reason, Rebecca, don't have an undergraduate degree. Maybe life got in the way, but yet they're a very senior, seasoned, professional individuals.
There are a lot of people, actually. I've got friends who are like that. So they don't have a degree, but they went in maybe at the client-facing level, but built their way up.
And now have very senior positions. In fact,
what about them?
Well, there is another pathway called the performance track. And so if you don't meet the direct admission pathway, we encourage you to go through what we call the performance track. Now, what that looks like, if you have a look, there's the second box on your slide there. If you go through the performance track, you're just enrolling in single courses, single subjects, right?
Okay, so like the courses that we've been through, and you complete them.
Yep, you complete. In fact, if you complete 8 of those, or 2 specialisations at 75% or above in terms of your academic performance, well, then you'll be invited automatic entry into the degree.
I like that.
So that says a couple of things. That says that you're demonstrating your academic confidence and your commitment in this degree. And so you're showing us that through your academic achievement, despite not meeting the actual criteria. So let's recap on that. There's 2 admission. There's 1 direct admission. If you meet the criteria, automatically you'll be accepted into the program. If you don't, there is an alternative thing called the performance track. So there's 2 bases.
That's fantastic. That's really good, because I think there are a lot of people who are thinking, look, I want to get ahead and I don't have the qualifications and I don't have the initial degree. I don't want to go back and get the initial degree, obviously. So this is terrific for them.
It's actually a true innovation when we think about dismantling some of the barriers.
Yeah, it is.
And this is what we're talking about when we think about the Global MBA. So now I'm just going to sort of bring out all these points into this sort of summary or conclusion, if you will. So when we talk about this program called the Global MBA, and why we're so proud and kind of excited and really passionate about it, and we make no apologies about this, is because it embraces things such as diversity, accessibility, affordability, inclusion,
excellence. We are really good, actually.
All the way through. And it just brings it to a completely different place in the market, in that it does offer a program that is available for the many rather than the few. So I'm really proud. We're really proud to be associated with something like this.
And this webinar, I just wanted to, is this webinar being recorded?
Indeed it is. And so some of you may not have been able to join us for one reason or another, or maybe have popped off to go to bed.
Or you have friends who you think might like this.
Right. And so everyone's going to be receiving a recording of this, the people who have registered, and it'll also be on our website. So
fabulous.
I'm just wondering if there are any other questions that are coming through that we haven't addressed. I think we're right on this one, Rebecca. So
have they got opportunities if they haven't had their question answered? Is there an email address?
Thank you for that. We encourage you. I'd love to have a conversation with you if you have some outstanding questions that we didn't address today. You might have a personal set of circumstances that you'd like to explore further. Happy to have a consult with you. So please book in, call us, email us, and we'll come back to you.
Yeah, great.
Certainly within 24 hours on that one. I know that we've kept you for 45 minutes. So I think we should probably wind it up right now. From wherever you are in the world, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Rebecca. And we hope you have a great day, evening, night, or whatever time it is.
Yes.
So thank you again. Good night.
Night. See you.